Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Benjamin Camus. I will be moderating this session, talking about the intersection of sport and sustainability. I'm the director at Evolution Markets, leading the corporate department and the carbon structure transaction division. I would like probably to start and thank my Evolution Markets and Xpansiv colleagues for making this day possible. Thank you very much, Jess. Then I will ask you to bear with me, with us, for two things. First, we are bringing a couple of French accents here. The second thing is we will be the last one standing between you and the cocktail.
The keynote.
And the keynote.
And the keynote.
And the keynote. But the cocktail. Wondering if it's because there's some French accent that they put us between the cocktail and you, but who knows?
Good wine, hopefully.
Yeah, basically. Joke aside, I'm really glad to be here, as we will have the opportunity during this session to hear from what we, between us, usually call the end buyers, but who are finally the real ones making possible the implementation of their sustainability strategy, thanks to the tool product that we are developing for them. So it will be also a good opportunity for us to perceive the way that they see and use the different tools and products that we are developing, how it can be instrumental for them to develop and achieve their own carbon management plan and sustainability strategy, what are their concerns also, and what they see as objectives and goals for their own entities and industry. This session will highlight also how the world of sport led by innovation like Formula E is shaping the future of sustainability. Beyond the excitement of competition and sport, sport are evolving into powerful platforms for developing and showcasing cutting-edge sustainable solutions. You will hear the success stories of how the industry is investing in transformative technologies and driving initiatives that are making a real difference in the fight against climate change. To talk about that and bring all the relevant content we need, I'm happy to introduce you to Julia Pallet, who is the VP of Sustainability at the ABB FIA Formula E Championship, the world's first fully electric single-seater racing series. Julia also serves as Sustainability Advisor for Xtreme, an all-electric SUV series, and E1 series, the world's first all-electric race boat championship. She is also the president of an NGO, Sport and Sustainability International, based in Geneva. We also have Brendan Moynihan, coming with his 25 years experience, with him always, working for most of the most influential properties and agencies in the industry, including NFL, Octagon, Lagardère. He is now the Executive Vice President for Consulting and Sponsorship Activation at Sport5. As an international sport business agency, Sport5 is at the center of professional sport and acts as an influential company at many interfaces of the global sport world. Sport5 also understands this privilege and has built a team to ensure they always have the focus on leaving a positive contribution to sustainability, to live up to the social and economic duty and responsibility which sport and consequently all parties involved also have. I will probably ask a first question to you, Julia, talking about sport, which is not always perceived as environmental friendly, beyond the borders, finally, in Europe, in US, everywhere. Considering the transportation, the waste generation around his activity, also the energy supply, of course. It's even probably truer for the motorsport industry. Can you just tell us how finally Formula E has been first sport to achieve net zero from day zero? And also, can you tell us how it all started for Formula E and how you managed to bring sustainability finally at the core of its business?
Yeah, great. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. It's great to be on this panel with Ben and Brendan. So really grateful to be here. So at Formally, obviously, we're a slightly different sport proposition because we were founded 10 years ago with sustainability at the heart. So the whole point was, okay, we know that one of the mass solutions that we'll be using to drive on the streets, at least not me saying it, the Bloomberg, the McKinseys of this world, is electric vehicles. The problem is that 10 years ago, while we were knowing that, we were not having the right technological solutions to be able really to spearhead the revolution. And so we used what in the automotive industry is seen as a classical tool, but for most of the people not really understood as such, motorsport, because motorsport is two things really: a fantastic laboratory to really test and really implement, develop technologies that will be transferred into the cars that you and I are driving, and then also a very powerful marketing platform. And again, taking a step back, 10 years ago, what we needed were both, because we were not thinking about electric vehicles as a way to really push forward a real, more sustainable agenda. People were not projecting themselves driving them, and the cities altogether were not ready. So taking all of this into account, basically the way we built the sport was putting sustainability at the heart, starting from the electric vehicles, starting from the fact that they are 100% powered by renewable energy. And so our journey really has been starting from the inside out, from the environmental perspective. And so that's how basically from day zero, which is the tagline that we've used, from day zero, we've been working to measure, reduce, and offset our carbon footprint to the point that in 2020, we achieved this milestone of carbon neutrality or net zero carbon, supported by experts. We'll come back to that. We've been working together with Benjamin for many years. And it's been very important because it really set a standard in the sports industry. Before we did that, there were a lot of people talking about it, committing about it. And I used to say, they pledge, we deliver. And that was really basically the starting point where one sport came out. We came out saying we reached net zero. It's not the end of the journey because straight after we baseline for science-based targets. So we were stating we had achieved a milestone. It was not the end game. There's no finish line ever in this sport. But that was really basically a strong, visible commitment and leadership in the industry. And the whole point since then has been to be staying true to what net zero means, and as you probably all know very well, it keeps evolving, and also to be able to influence others. And I'm sure that's where you're going to come and be able to comment on that nicely.
Thank you very much, Julia. Makes sense. Maybe, Brendan, talking about bringing sustainability at the core of the business for a sport entity, thinking about the way that today, beyond the result, beyond the events, the sport industry is driven by, of course, visibility, raising capital, being the first one, being everywhere. Also about the community engagement around the fans and all the different leverage that you can have to bring more of this to you. How do you think that the sustainability strategy can finally enhance really sports appeal to sponsors and stakeholders in highly competitive industries such as the sport one?
It's a great question. First and foremost, Benjamin, thank you for having me, and great to be here with you, Julia. So at Sport5, we're very unlike our competitors. We are actually based in Germany, and as a European company, sustainability is part of our core. And so all of our competitors, you'll probably know them much more than us, but CAA, Endeavor, 160/90, all the big guys. They're American-based, and sustainability is kind of a foreign word to them in a different way. So sustainability, first and foremost, when we talk about it from a Sport5 perspective, is really focused on the UN 17 plan project, right? So we actually had a meeting about this in Germany 4 years ago, and I was talking about how sustainability is a huge opportunity in America, and all my German colleagues were like, well, yeah, I mean, social and all these different areas, and all of the US executives were talking about green, and they're like, that's not really what sustainability means to us, right? And so we were talking about this earlier, there's like this inverse of what's happened in the sports world, in that America, we are much more advanced when it comes to social sustainability projects, and then in Europe, much more green sustainable projects. So, we represent a lot of the Bundesliga, we represent a lot of the EPL. Those projects have been going on for years, and they have sponsors that are very heavily involved in making all those entities much greener. And then inversely, they're behind the times in how things are working from a social standpoint. It seems more forced to them, whereas the inverse is happening here. So that's first and foremost, is that we're kind of different in that way. But then really, to answer your question, sport is quite possibly the most powerful vehicle on the planet to reach people. We're in this strange time in the world that we are being pushed content constantly. And I don't know about you, but I try to turn it off as much as possible. But my phone keeps telling me as a side sleeper that I need to buy this pillow because it's going to make my life better. Because that's what happens, right? It like reads our minds, it reads what we're talking, what we're about, what we're reading about, and then it pushes us content. And then we end up buying it because that's what we think we have to do. But at the same time, the one thing that everyone's really passionate about is what they're really leading towards, right? If a tennis player loves tennis, they are seeking out tennis content. The same thing goes for a basketball player or a golfer. So sponsorships, when they are attached to something that people are truly powerful about, or really fans about, that message can be crystal clear and can be really powerful. So the opportunity for sustainable messaging, if done properly, just like how things have been done socially here in the U.S., it could be extremely successful. So the U.S. is finally starting to realize that this is a business opportunity. We were talking about it earlier that I think Formula E is probably the only true sports property that has this at its core. I'd say, I talk to every major sports property out there. 9 out of 10 times, if I'm talking to a sponsorship salesperson and I bring up sustainability, they instantly go, "Oh, I don't know what that means. Let me get back to you," right? And so the fact that they say that means that it's not at the core of what they're looking to do from a business perspective. Because if it truly was, they'd be talking about it and how to build their business around it. And there's a huge opportunity for that. So kudos to you guys, but I think that it's a real untapped market in the US.
And so back on these points, on the challenges, I understand that probably the lack of knowledge of the sponsors to understand how they can integrate this sustainability strategy and how they can also make something with that, also integrate that into their usual business model, return on investment, social return on investment. But from your perspective and what you are seeing mainly, of course, in the US today, but what are the key challenges for sponsors to really align probably the sponsor's expectation and the sustainability goals and finally the sports entities looking for sustainability objectives?
It's a great question. I think it just needs to be truly authentic to what they want to do. Especially with younger fans, Gen Z, et cetera. If it's not truly authentic to what they're trying to do, it doesn't make sense. And it's going to become, it's that much more important moving forward for them to have an authentic business plan around this. So, the good news is that I'm starting to see it in RFPs, which I've never seen before. So an RFP, just like you guys probably have, a brand will come to us with 9 other agencies and say, come back to us with an idea on how to activate an NBA partnership. And in the past, it's always been about objective A, B, and C, and it's always sales and measurement around exposures and stuff like that. But finally, you're starting to see, what are we doing around sustainability?
Yeah.
And so that's finally starting to creep into brands' plan about how to grow business.
Sure. Okay.
Can I echo to that?
Yeah, of course.
A couple of years ago, we signed one of the main partners at the start of the series, which is Allianz, the insurance company based in Germany, obviously operating all around the world. And basically the final stage of the negotiation, I was in the room with the chief sustainability officer that basically would not have given the green light to sign and basically put the money, obviously, forward for the sponsorship, unless it was matching her own sustainability targets and objectives, and she could actually basically achieve some of these through the sponsorship. So I think, what you described is absolutely right. It's just that it's taking time to basically change a business as usual habit, where sustainability was just never, it's normally a support function. It's like HR. You would never put HR in a conversation about sponsorship. Well, now you need to put sustainability in a sponsorship conversation, because they will be integral if you want to successfully turn that in something that is going to be attractive from the ESG point of view and the Gen Z point of view.
Thank you. Talking about the expectation, but then talking about implementation. We are here to connect the dots. So the carbon market is complaining about the lack of responsiveness of the private sector to be able to take a commitment, to move forward, to buy more. Corporates, discussion we have, but also all our corporate clients are, say, questioning the incapacity for them to understand really how they can use the carbon market for their own purpose, what they can extract from this market to make it concrete. I know that you are always striving to align formulae with the internationally recognized standards. Can you just tell us a little bit more on the practical, really, side of the story? How does it look like to implement your carbon management plan, your sustainability strategy, and finally, why potentially this time frame for decision, for implementation can be longer than expected by everyone? Starting by you, probably.
It's a very important point, and I think what creates this gap in between what the market is expecting and what corporate are waiting in terms of making the decision is the fact that there's no clear regulations from the corporate's point of view. And so that's what creates these sort of blurred lines where most of the corporates are going to be like, okay, well, so what is United Nations telling me to do, and so on. And so where obviously, the way we've drawn the line at Formula is fine. Where we want to be out is always being, the next one trialing and testing a new idea, a new project, a new regulation and legislation that is coming out, even if we take the risk of sometimes a bit of trial and error. But what is important for me is basically on the day-to-day to have the right partners that are basically working with you, making sense of all of that. And that's, again, the essence of the job that we've done with Benjamin and his team, where, in essence, a couple of years ago, no one was talking about carbon removals. And so, you build your strategy, you're like, okay, I measure my carbon footprint, maybe I'm going to have that third-party verified, and then I'm aligned to science-based targets. That's also a big piece. And then on top of that, I buy my carbon credits, maybe my RECs or my GEOs and so on, because I want to do everything right in the best, in the best possible way of my understanding as to what is expected of me, only on a voluntary basis. And that's why it's hard then to convince your executive, board of saying we're investing all this money, because let's face it, it's a lot of resources in terms of personal, in terms of in-house and support, but because we really believe it's the right thing, this is what is going to be leading edge. But on top of that, the market keeps evolving. As I was mentioning, we went out with net zero carbon since inception in 2020. Since then, the definition has completely evolved. So now we're basically pedaling to try and realign constantly every 6 months that the definition evolves. So that's what it looks like on the day-to-day, and that's where probably you see a bit of disconnect, and probably that creates a bit of frustration, because we're a bit basically confused as to what is moving on. We're disconnected from basically what the market and really the decision-making at, really the top level are discussing and going through and giving us sort of strategic direction. And for us in a corporate to be able to take that in, realign your budget, realign your strategic plan, obviously it takes time. But again, for me, the key in all of that is if you have a partner that you trust and that can accompany you, then you're sorted.
Thank you. Brendan, any You mentioned the expectation of the sponsors, at least in the RFPs, on probably the expectation that they have to see ambition, to see targets. Do you see anything also starting to come on the monitoring and tracking of this progress and what they can really try to see when I come with you as a sponsor for 5 years commitment? Mm-hmm. We know that we want to go in this direction. How do you see also the kind of tracking of the different KPIs that you can put in place to also reassure them on the fact that what they expected to see will happen?
Yeah, it's a tricky category, right? In that, from a U.S. perspective, sales sponsorship people are they have like the big five, right? It's like telecom and beer and car and all these different things, and they're selling to bring those in at the biggest numbers. And for the most part, those companies have certain KPIs that are about numbers of beer sold, right? And things like that. So the good news is that the U.S. is a copycat economy. And so to your point, as people start building strategies and testing and learning and succeeding, it'll just start growing, right? And so a lot of what me and my other executive members is trying to work with our global team and taking success stories from Europe and Asia and bringing them here on what we can do in the U.S. One of our clients, Xylem, which is a water company in the UK, they did a deal with Manchester City to really get the message out there that there's going to be a water problem. And they were trying all different sorts of ways. And what's the best way to sort of get people in that area of the world to pay attention than to grab the biggest sort of megaphone there is, and what people truly are passionate about. And so we've created a campaign that says, if we don't fix the way we're doing things, that pitch that you love is not going to be green. And you're not going to be seeing a football game on a grass field, right? So if we don't start changing the way we live our life, there are going to be repercussions that we're not comfortable with. And we just did one video about it that we used Pep and you used a couple players, and it went viral, and people all of a sudden were like, holy mackerel, like this is something we need to get behind. And Xylem went from a 2-year deal that was something that was just a test and learn, and they re-upped for 5 years. And again, it's not necessarily a huge moneymaker for Man City, but what it does is it actually is helping them and their society and their actual fan base understand that there's more to life than just football. And if you want football to succeed, you have to be paying attention to other things as well. So, in talking to you over the last few months, it doesn't necessarily have to be these big deals that are driving revenue, but it's also about VIK and other ways to get creative of how to help the organization, how to help the team, the property, and actually help the fan base at the same time. And that authentic story, if it can be done properly, people will start copying.
Yeah.
I would say it's all about the brand reputation. And brand reputation obviously is less obvious to put basically in the framework of metrics, but it's very hard to build that equity in terms of people really associating your brand to something that is really like truly deeply perceived as sustainable. Mm-hmm. And once you get there, that's money can't buy, literally.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Sure. You've mentioned both, what we could put under the umbrella of legacy with the platform for education, with the fans, with the fact that communication is also a big piece around the sustainability programs to make sure that there's also some good story to share, some case study to share. Julia, I know that Formula E is pushing a lot on this side for, again, the fan engagement. Can you just tell us a little bit more about what it can be in terms of, again, practical term, how it looks like, and what is the leverage behind it, and how Formula E is really on the top of it for the moment?
So it all starts in the classic way of understanding our audience, what they want, and how do they react to our messages. facts are our audience is roughly 50-50 male and female in terms of gender parity, roughly under 35 with obviously a big surge that is coming where they are just not like under 20. So we have a very, very young audience, which is fantastic because that's what brands want. And I mean, you mentioned it, Brendan, basically the expectation, the demand, it's a demand for them to have sustainability credentials in any of the properties that they're going to be putting their precious attention, because there are so much competing basically opportunities to watch a movie and then watch football and watch Formula E and watch here and there. And so they're young. They demand sustainability. They want this to be authentic, absolutely. And what is interesting is that we've realized that they come to our sport for the excitement, but they stay because of the sustainability credentials. We have analyzed that. So roughly 40% come through the sustainability angle, but almost 70 remain engaged because of the sustainability credentials and content that constantly basically is pushed on our channels. And so what we've seen is that, what is powerful is when we can geo-target the content. So the beauty of the series is that we race in, most of the countries in the world, or geographies, let's say macro geographies in the world. And so, 2 years ago, we did a beach cleanup in Jakarta. We were racing literally basically by the seaside. And the reaction of the fans in Jakarta, Indonesia was amazing because they were so proud and so grateful that we were taking care of that. We had our drivers or sponsors that were taking part and so on and so forth. And this performed so well. That's where we realized that not only basically we need to activate it, not only we know that they react positively to it, but on top of that, if it's something that they feel strongly about, that they feel we take care of their own community, whether it's through an environmentally or more socially focused program activation, then it works because you basically get the loyalty of your fan. That is obviously one that is so hard to get in sport.
Thank you.
Well said.
Brendan, anything you want to add? Especially on this legacy side, the fact that it's also, in terms of business, an opportunity to raise new opportunities for revenues, having a sponsor relying on one sport brand with this sustainability credential and being able to bring more fans to them and finally leverage this visibility as a sponsor.
No, I think what you said was extremely well said. I kind of want to make a recycling joke and just say ditto, but again, I think in the U.S. We have a long way to go, and I think certain properties are doing a really good job of making sure that their events and their properties are really becoming sustainable unto themselves. We've talked about PGA Tour events. We run 7 of them, and we're taking we're making sure that we're responsible to make sure that those events are green as possible. And so, like a Waste Management, ironically, it's quite possibly the most hedonistic event ever, and there's insane waste, but they actually do something with it and they make good out of it, right? So it's really tricky because, again, there's so much drive to make sure that these marketing dollars are actually returning and driving revenue. But it's great to see things like Amazon and doing Climate Pledge Arena, and actually, to your point, making sure that they're doing things larger about what they're giving back to the community. So, yeah.
Okay, good. Coming back on one point, we mentioned also collaboration, which was also one of the topics that was probably transversal during the entire day, on how the NGOs, how the governmental bodies, the private sector from different origin, and again, trying to connect the dot also clearly with our market today, having the renewables on one side, the carbon project now divided in a way into between the avoidance ones, the removals ones. I, of course, seeing both the corporates and the markets on a day-to-day basis, I can easily understand why it's so hard for entities, sponsors, corporates to really understand how they can find their own way of appropriation. So I was wondering also about your view on this collaborative approach, being able to bring around the same table financial companies, governmental bodies, NGOs, the people from the sustainability team working on a day-to-day on that, but also all the other ones, the venues, the teams. How do you see an opportunity through this collaboration to make sure that everyone can bring his own expertise to make it happen? And again, from also for our audience to make sure and reassure us maybe on the fact that, of course, being more collaborative will help us also to bring and create more success stories, and so increase also the opportunity for the market on our side.
I'm happy to
To
start.
you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just going to give one example, which I find extremely powerful. So, because we're only 10 years old at Formula E, we're in total growth phase of the series. So, which means my job is hard because I need to, we keep adding races and I need to see the carbon footprint continually decreasing. So we call that the Project X. So how do we keep growing while continually decreasing? And my Project X got fixed due to two reasons just over the last 3 months. First thing, we have a global partnership with DHL, the big logistics partner. And DHL obviously are in a very, interesting, if not difficult position because, all of our scope 3 is their scope 1 and 2 when they basically transport all our cars around the world. And so obviously DHL are massively investing into sustainable aviation fuel. And so for the first time in sports and motorsports a couple of months ago, we transported all the freight from Europe to China just ahead of our Shanghai Hepri in sustainable aviation fuel powered planes. And that's massive for us because that's something that will enable us to stay true to our commitment of continually growing and developing the series while keeping our promise of sustainability and net zero at the core. And just, a few weeks ago, basically on the back of this new way of approaching logistics and so on, we've been actually, this is not yet official, so that's going to be a little secret, but we've been completely rethinking with DHL being absolutely, I think, motivated and pumped up in a sense by what we had done with the SAF. We've actually basically reduced the amount of planes that were flying for us by 1. So we used to have 3 planes. We now only have 2, so a third of our basically air footprint is going to be reduced because DHL has understood that it's mutually beneficial to both of us. It's good for them because their footprint radically reduces because they then transfer to sea freight, so the sea freight footprint is minimal. And it's good for us because then we can again basically stay on track of the science-based target decrease. And that's the power of partnership for me. That's 2 entities that were having the same objectives coming from different sides of the table, scope 1 and 2, scope 3. How can we work together, invest together, think creatively together, and in the end make it?
Great.
That's a fantastic example. I wish the whole...
It's going to come.
I wish it all worked that way. And I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but I think you and I have talked about this, that sometimes they don't align, right? And so again, a sponsorship team at a brand sometimes is so responsible for making the return on investment happen that often they will, I don't want to say the brand, but they will make sure that a number of product is sold into the partnership itself, so that the product is sold at an event, and it would be much better for everyone involved if they weren't using bottles, but because they get the results from the number of cases sold, they keep it in there, and they know that it would be much better for everyone. We've talked about this.
Yeah.
That they would switch to cold serve, right? And again, I'm hoping that changes sooner rather than later, because if you do find the right partner, I think what's going to happen is eventually teams, and it's a good and a bad thing that ownership groups, especially in the U.S., are becoming much more savvy, and they're already, for the most part, extremely wealthy, so they can make decisions about their own stadiums and their own properties and making sure that they're as green as possible. So we work, again, in Europe to make sure that these teams, that rainwater is collected and they're using the rainwater to use it on the grass as opposed to using water from somewhere else, and using recycled cups as opposed to just throwing out millions of cups every year. So there are ways to do that, but until you find true partners, and I hate to say it, until you find organizations that hold them to the fire of saying there is return here, the marketing return and doing the right thing outweighs your case sales, it won't all change. So I'm hoping that happens sooner rather than later.
Thank you.
I would say that we're starting to see that though, because
We are, but
I mean,
I think there's some big ones that are not doing it yet.
Exactly. I mean, we're just basically on the back of the Paris Olympics, and Coca-Cola was pushed so much in the. I mean, the Paris organization or organizing committee was pushed so much for their partnership with Coca-Cola that they had basically to remove the bottles from the sites, which means the media are getting there. They're starting to play their role, I would say, almost finally.
Right, and that's exactly what I'm saying. Is that large governing bodies like the Olympics and others have amazing power. Power that has never really been seen in sport before. And so them pushing sponsors to do the right thing makes our jobs easier because it's the right thing to do. There's one that needs to get on board, in my opinion. But,
I mean, we're all talking about these guidelines, this framework, but finally the structure of some regulation will definitively help corporates to move forward. Fantastic, thank you very much. I would like just to ask if there's any specific question that you want to ask, or if we have a couple of minutes.
No.
Back.
Thank you. So just thinking about the number of players, right, with hundreds of millions of people that look up to these players, particularly kids. It's just obviously such an incredibly powerful opportunity here. And in the US, as an example, you see the NFL, and you have communities, what is it? It's Humanity for Habitat, I think, in the NFL. In the NBA, you have a lot of these players that talk about the importance of voting right now. Can you just speak to that a little bit and the power of what you see potentially happening if some of these players and some of these leagues kind of get behind it to the point that you start to see that happening, or if you don't start to see that happening? I mean, just would love you to expand on that.
Yeah, from a U.S. perspective, I think it's extremely powerful, and I fully support it. It gets very political quickly, right? And that certain statements can be taken out of context, or certain actions. So I think the NFL has done a nice job over the last 7 years or so. This is like an impossible job to be the commissioner of the NFL. You're basically reporting to 32 billionaires that have the biggest egos on the planet, and they all have different agendas, and they all have different opinions on different things. And the NFL has done a really nice job to say, we're going to allow players to put things on helmets and statements, and allow them to speak their mind, because they do have the power to change society for the better. And for the most part, most athletes in the U.S. use that privilege powerfully and correctly. Obviously, there are a bunch of knuckleheads out there that use it the wrong way. But to me, I'd much rather have my kids watching that than on social media and buying Prime and all that crazy stuff, which has different meanings. But I think the U.S., again, for what I was saying earlier, has done a great job leading from the social perspective, and they're trailing on the green perspective. Hopefully, they catch up.
Yeah, I mean, on my side, the drivers, are not always known to have a very sustainable lifestyles. You would see some of the cliches of them, flying in private jets and so on and so forth. You could argue that at least they can probably afford sustainable aviation fuel. But in essence, what has always been my motto with the teams is, the problem with athletes is there's so much pressure on them. They're expected to be perfect, and they're not. No one is perfect. We're just human beings. So I've said, like, whatever they do, they need to really care and really believe in it to be consistent. So I don't know. One is going to care about biodiversity because they have, I don't know, a cat. It's like so stupid and simple, but like they're going to really care. And so we can take them to, like a natural reserve when we're in South Africa because they're really going to be into it, and that's authentic and you can feel that. Whereas another one is going to be, I don't know, like a crazy runner, and so all the topic of air quality is going to be really something that is important to him, so he can talk eloquently about it. So that's what we've done. A couple of years ago, we had one of our drivers that became a UNEP ambassador. And that went really well because, he was really invested, he was reading, he was trying to understand, and so on and so forth. And UN loved that. That was really, really good.
And just to quickly add to that, again, being authentic, I think one thing that athletes really can impact is mental health. This is something that over the last few years, there have been some really amazing athletes that have come out and said, listen, like, I'm not perfect. And the pressure that's put on me to be perfect, nobody can do this. And I think that's really helpful for society in general, but especially for kids.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Russell Karras from Xpansiv. It's been really interesting presentation about an industry that I watch on TV to know a lot about. So you mentioned carbon, you mentioned RECs, so scope 1 and scope 2. Really interesting part about the water as well. Think about all the plastic, just think about the car industry overall, and they're talking about some of the specific beverage companies. Is that part of Formula E's sustainability plan in terms of recycled materials and reduction in plastic
Yeah,
use?
it's a very good question. So we have, it's probably not what we elevate the most because it's hard to compete on the sport topic as such, but the racing cars that we have at the moment are the first ever racing cars that have been designed with circular basically principles. So we've done a life cycle assessment of the previous generation of a racing car. We change them every 4 years, basically. It's a brand new racing car because the technology develops so fast. So we did a life cycle assessment on the previous one to be able to design the new one by basically decreasing the carbon footprint. And everything has been taken into account to make sure that we could recycle all the tires, the battery cells, especially the minerals, which is the most sensitive thing, and then the chassis of the cars, the bodywork that is mostly done in carbon fiber. And ultimately, there's little plastics in the car. It's mostly the plastic that is in the battery. But again, it's something that we've looked at holistically to make sure that there would be as much as possible an alternative and that there could be a very clear and proper end of life.
Anything else? Yes, please.
I just had a quick question. And this is just about your R&D in Formula E. I was wondering if you're still doing any research into hydrogen or other new technologies, or if you could just comment on that. Thank you.
Yeah. So hydrogen is, basically the way we're projecting this is it's going to become a fantastic way of producing renewable energy. It's still green electricity, ultimately, which will basically not change the way the projection in terms of road cars being led by the EV solutions, roughly 75% of, or basically, streets will be occupied by electric vehicles tomorrow. What we're seeing for hydrogen is more for heavier in terms of mass vehicles, trucks, very promising in planes also. And so one of the organizations that I advise on Extreme E is going to become Extreme H. And Extreme H is basically going to use hydrogen for SUVs, which obviously are much heavier vehicles, so that we test at small but demanding scale the technology, and we're basically able to support the rest of the transport industry, because it's true with Formula E, we focus on the automotive purely, like what you and I touch on a daily basis, whether we jump in a taxi or we jump in our own cars. But there's the rest, and there's a lot to be able to support the investment in this part of the transportation industry.
Perfect. Right on time. Final word for the panelists, or we are done? It's good for you, Julia, and Dan? All good?
It's exciting.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you all
Thank
of
you
you.
very much.